Impressive, said Tiffany. My son's fiancée, her voice sweet as honey, cold as steel, that you've spent your whole life crawling under cars. The air went heavy. My son, Leo, stood frozen, color drained from his face. Tiffany smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. Fortunately, Leo has bigger vision. I said nothing. I flipped the steak on the grill. It answered with an angry hiss that sliced the silence. That was the moment I decided the play had run long enough. My name is Frank Miller. I'm 68 years old, and I'm about to smash my son's counterfeit, Perfect Life. I set the tongs down and said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Then maybe that big vision can cover the next $5,000 payment on the marketing company loan. I paused and met my boy's eyes. The loan I've been paying for 6 months so you can play entrepreneur. Tiffany's smile shattered. And that was only the first crack. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you? And where are you listening? My name is Frank Miller. I'm 68, and most of my life can be measured by the smell of machine oil and the feel of cold steel against calloused fingertips. But that afternoon, when I steered my old Ford pickup onto the velvet smooth stone drive to my son's house, the air carried a different scent entirely. Their new place had its own signature smell. Fresh paint, expensive oak, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe the smell of trying too hard. Everything was perfect, too perfect. The lawn was trimmed with the precision of a laser turn part. The roses along the walk looked as if they'd stepped out of a catalog. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a stage. Leo, my only son, met me at the door. He wore a cream polo I knew cost enough to replace all 4 of my tires. He hugged me, his arms went around my shoulders, but there was no weight to it, no warmth. It was the kind of gesture you perform for the benefit of the guests parking their glossy European cars up and down the street. Dad's here. Everyone's been waiting, he said, his voice carrying a synthetic ring. His laugh boomed too loud. In the room padded with soft furnishings, the sound of a man trying to fill a hole, an echo in a dry well. Then Tiffany appeared, my son's fiancée, the architect of all this perfection. Her smile never reached her eyes. It was a motion of the mouth, something rehearsed in the mirror, the kind of smile you use to sell things. Mr. Miller, I'm so glad you could make it, she said, ushering me in. Inside, the house was so clean it felt sterile, more showroom than shelter, not a magazine out of place, not a scuff on the floor, the perfection of a place where no real argument had ever landed. Tiffany gave me the grand tour, her voice lilting like a docent's. In the kitchen, an aircraft hangar of a room with gleaming stainless appliances, she trailed her slim fingers across the marble counter. Just perfect, she sighed. We finally have a space that's ours. The word ours hung in the air, a word that didn't seem to have room for the man who signed the last check from his retirement fund to pay for it. I remember driving to 3 different suppliers to find that exact stone, the tired weight of my credit card sliding through, telling myself it was an investment in my boy's future. I only nodded. We gathered in the living room. Leo, face full of pride, pointed to a giant abstract over the fireplace, red and black slashes that, to me, looked like a transmission fluid leak. By a rising artist in Brooklyn, he announced. A man in the vest, one of the important somebodies Tiffany wanted to impress, asked, "What's it saying, Leo? What's the artist's idea?" A beat of silence. Leo blinked, his smile tightening. He flicked a quick, pleading glance at Tiffany, something only a father would catch. She stepped in at once. It's a dialogue between urban chaos and the stillness of the interior self. She recited smoothly, like reading from a script. A tension between form and void. I looked at my son. He nodded solemnly, as if he fully grasped that string of nonsense. I know my boy. He can pick out the sound of a bat piston from 20 yards away, but a dialogue of form? He wouldn't recognize it if it smacked him in the face. He didn't even understand the thing he was showing off. I eased back into a corner with a beer and watched. The kid moved through his own house with the careful tread of a guest, afraid to spot the rug, afraid to disturb Tiffany's perfect arrangement. I saw her whisper in his ear, and Leo promptly made for the suited couple to chat them up. I saw him hug an old high school friend, an empty embrace, performed for watching eyes. Then the moment came, the first hairline crack. Leo went to the bar where a bottle of Macallan 25 stood like a king, my housewarming gift. I debated for a month before buying it, telling myself my son deserved the best. He didn't just open the whiskey, he conducted a ceremony the way he slid the foil, the flourish as the cork popped. A show for the audience he wanted to impress. He poured for his partners, men in suits that cost more than my truck. Then he raised his glass. To self-made men, he shouted. To those who dare to dream big and make it real. Applause filled the room. And through it all, his eyes skimmed past me as if I were part of the furniture. As if the father who handed him his first hammer, who taught him to change oil, who stayed up nights rebuilding his first car never existed. That night, driving my pickup home back to the world of things that are real, of grease and metal, I didn't feel angry. Anger is hot, a flare. What I felt was colder, harder. It was clarity. I knew I wasn't just looking at a new house. I was looking at a structure raised on a failing foundation. And I was the only one who could hear it crack. A good mechanic never trusts the glossy paint. He trusts what's underneath. He listens to the engine, hunts for an odd clack, a wrong vibration. And my son's business, it was humming like a machine about to fail. Every lie leaves a trace, like a drip of oil. At first, it's a speck, but follow it and it leads you to a crack in the block. And I was ready to get my hands dirty. My investigation began on a Tuesday morning at the quietest place I know. The old workbench in my garage with a cup of black coffee and the laptop Leo bought me a few years back. I typed Miller Marketing Group into Google. Their website popped up like a showroom car, shiny, perfect, photos of modern offices and smiling, busy people. The testimonials page was full of praise from grand-sounding companies. Innovate Corp, Synergy Solutions, but no logos, no links. The contact listed an address on Park Avenue downtown, the kind of rent that would swallow my shop's yearly income in its heyday. But lift the hood, and there was nothing, just an empty shell. The next day, I told myself I needed to go into the city to pick up a special fuel filter, a small lie. I fired up the pickup looking lost among black sedans and drove to that glass and steel tower. I stepped into the polished lobby feeling out of place in my work clothes. The tenant directory was a giant touchscreen. I typed Miller Marketing Group. It came up 42nd floor, Suite B. When the elevator opened on 42, there was no office, only a shared reception and a row of frosted glass doors. Suite B wasn't an office. It was a mailbox, a virtual office. The young receptionist explained, a service for people who want a glossy address on their business cards. Driving past that office and seeing it was just a rented mailbox didn't surprise me. It just gave me a cold clarity, like finally finding the oil leak you'd suspected for weeks. That night, I scrolled their social feeds. Not the Bali beaches or champagne on yachts. I looked at the people tagged. All the key partners were friends from Tiffany's dad's golf club. All the big clients were tiny startups owned by those same friends. I was checking the wiring, and everything looped back on itself. One closed circuit of self-promotion with no real-world hookups. The next day, I called Big Mike. Mike and I grew up together. He now runs a small print shop on the outskirts. Hey Mike, I said, keeping my voice casual. You ever do work for a young marketing outfit? Miller Marketing? Kid named Leo? There was a pause, then Mike's low chuckle. Oh, your boy Leo? Yeah. Came in a few months back. Ordered the most ridiculous business cards and brochures, thick stock, embossing, the whole thing. Looked like something from the Fortune 500. He hesitated. But weird, Frank. When I asked about actual projects, he dodged. Felt like he was selling the ad, not the service. The final piece fell into place on Friday. Leo emailed me a monthly update Tiffany's idea to keep investors informed. Attached was a PDF invoice for market research for $5,000, the money I sent him last week. I opened it. I've seen thousands of invoices in my life. I know the weight of paper, the feel of real ink. Even on a screen, I could smell the forgery. It wasn't just the numbers. It was the font, a free font anyone can download. The spacing, too even, too perfect. The tax ID was a nonsense string. A mechanic reads small details. A loose bolt, a worn gasket. This invoice someone had cobbled it together in a hurry. A counterfeit part. I sat in my garage surrounded by real tools and real engines, things that run on principles you can't bargain with. I stared at that fake invoice on the screen. My anger did not flare. It crystallized cold and hard as steel. A plan began to form. I realized I couldn't keep pouring oil into a broken engine. I had to let it stall. You can't tell a reckless driver he's going too fast. You let him find the dead end himself. My plan was simple. Show them a shiny shortcut, and then I dismantled the bridge. From Tiffany's excited posts, I knew they were planning a month in the Hamptons that summer not for rest, but to network, as she put it. I also heard, carelessly, from Leo that the non-refundable payment on that swanky rental came due on the 15th. I checked the calendar. I had 1 week. My move wasn't aimed at Leo. He's soft. He runs back to me when things go wrong. No, the target was Tiffany. She was the driver. Tiffany was a high-performance race car that ran on expensive fuel, admiration, status, notoriety, and I knew exactly what kind of fuel would blind her. I waited until Wednesday night and I called. Not Leo, Tiffany. Tiffany, this is Frank. I began, letting warmth and a little naivete into my voice. Got a tip you'll like. I was talking to an old friend, Jim Holloway. Do you know him? He's a long-time member of the Sag Harbor Yacht Club. I mentioned Miller Marketing Group and Jim was, well, very impressed. Extremely impressed. I could almost hear her attention spike over the line. He said he wants to invite you two to an exclusive charity event at the club at the end of the month. Lots of big names will be there, but there's a small hitch. I paused, pretending to hesitate. The event is members only. He said, you could register for a temporary membership, but it needs to be arranged quickly. I didn't mention money. I appealed to the thing Tiffany truly craved, recognition. An invite to the yacht club wasn't a gift. It was base soaked in the prestige she couldn't resist. Oh, Mr. Frank, that's incredible, she cried, barely able to contain herself. Absolutely will be there. Tell Mr. Holloway we'll attend. I can't miss this. They took the bait. I knew perfectly well the sudden initiation fee for that club was $10,000, an amount I was sure they didn't have. The next morning was clear and bright. I drove to my local bank. It wasn't dramatic, just my signature on the form. Brenda, the teller, a young woman I'd known since she was a kid, asked if I was sure. I nodded. 5 minutes later, the savings account into which I'd been steadily depositing $5,000 a month for Leo for the past 6 months was no more. A quiet move, like tightening a valve. I didn't take the money out. I simply cut off the fuel line. I gave them 4 days. 4 days of silence. On Monday afternoon, I loaded a crate of tomatoes from my garden into the truck and drove to their upscale neighborhood. I had no intention of going inside. I only wanted to watch. I parked under a great oak at the end of the street, where I could see their house. Then I heard them. Their living room window was open, and sharp voices carried over the manicure lawns. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught panic and anger. It was Tiffany's voice, glassy, broken. I told you I could handle it, Leo. How could we possibly? My reputation is on the line. Then Leo, small and desperate. I don't know. I tried. The money from Dad. It hasn't come through. His day. I sat in my truck, knuckles wide on the wheel, and felt nothing. No relish, no pity, only the cold confirmation of a diagnosis. It was the sound of metal grinding where oil is missing. Their perfect machine was tearing itself apart from the inside. That night, the phone rang. It was Leo. Dad, he said, trying to sound controlled. You doing okay? I just checking in. And, was there a problem with this month's transfer? I let the silence hang long enough for him to hear his own engine dying. I could hear his breath quicken on the other end. Then I said, steady as an idling motor. Oh, I thought the company was doing well. I paused. Let me think. And I hung up. The first domino had fallen, and I was the one who pushed it. That Sunday, the Carolina sun hung in the sky hot, unforgiving, a perfect day for a cookout. My backyard was my territory. Everything here was real. The smell of hickory charcoal I split with my own hands, the weight of the stainless tongs I've used for 20 years, the calluses that never left even after I retired. This was my world, a world built of tangible things, and I wanted them to bring their make-believe into it. I wanted to see how their glossy finish would hold up to the bare heat of the truth. I didn't invite many people. That's never been my style. The Hendersons from across the street, Dave's a near-retired accountant who can talk tax code all day but is as loyal as they come. And Mrs. Gable next door, a widow with sharp eyes that miss nothing on our block. They've known me 30 years. They brought chicken soup when Mary, my wife, passed. They watched Leo grow from a grease-smeared kid, wrestling a wrench bigger than his arm. They were my jury, though they didn't know it. They arrived late, of course. The white BMW slid up my gravel drive like a swan strayed onto a farm. Its tires whispered over the stones, too dainty, too polite, so unlike the familiar growl of my Ford. When Leo and Tiffany stepped out, tension clung to them like static. They looked like they'd spent a week arguing in shut rooms and were now forced to paste on smiles for a neighborhood matinee. Tiffany's lemon yellow sundress was still expensive. Her smile wasn't. It was glued on. "Hey, everybody," Leo said, voice pitched a little too high, trying for cheerful, giving Dave Henderson an awkward hug. I only nodded from the grill, keen over my little realm of smoke and fire. "Steaks are almost ready," I said, offering them no hint, no clue. My normalcy seemed to rattle them more than any accusation. I could feel Tiffany's gaze on me, trying to read, hunting for a sign, an explanation for my week of silence. I gave her nothing. I focused on my work, turning the steaks with deliberate care. In my world, actions weigh more than words. A little later, while Leo fumbled tensely with a bottle of wine, Tiffany drifted over. She moved with calculated grace, the smile still pinned in place. "Mr. Frank," she began, honey sweet with an undercurrent of naked urgency. "Could we talk for a minute? Just a moment. About that investment." Investment. She said it easily, as if she truly believed her own stage play. I watched the steak sizzle, perfect char lines forming. "Later, Tiffany, the meat's about to burn." I turned my back, used the tongs to slide a ribeye to a cooler spot. I could feel her anger rising hotter than my grill. Being ignored is a weapon people like her, people accustomed to attention, never learn to parry. It's like cutting the oxygen to a flame. I glanced over my weathered fence. Mrs. Gable was weeding her eggplant bed, her ears surely pricked like twin antennas. I tipped my chin. She answered with a knowing smile. I wondered what story she was telling herself, happy family barbecue or well-rehearsed drama. Tiffany noticed her too, and I saw her shoulders tighten. The pressure to save face was ratcheting up. She tried again, closer now, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Just 1 minute. This is really important for Leo's plans. More important than not turning everyone's lunch into charcoal?" I asked, still not looking at her. I lifted the ribeye and inspected it the way a surgeon studies a seam. That was a breaking point. I stripped her of control, refused her sense of importance. Her patience, thin after a week of money stress, finally snapped. Dave Henderson had just come over to ask if I needed a hand, carrying 2 cold beers. And right there in front of him, in front of my son, frozen a few steps away, Tiffany let it fly. She tried to wear a halter, a superior little smile, but I could see the panic and anger firing in her eyes. "Oh, fine," she said, voice sharp and shrill now, no longer bothered with whispers. "I get it. You're very proud of your work." She swept her gaze around my yard, the old tools hanging on the garage wall, the worn lawn chair, a look of clumsy disdain. Then she fixed on me. "It's admirable, really, that you spend your life crawling under cars." She let it settle. Luckily, Leo has bigger vision. The air thickened. Even the crickets in the shrubs seemed to cut their chorus. Dave stared at his shoes, suddenly fascinated by his beat-up sneakers. Leo went white, like he wished the ground would open and swallow him. The world shrank to the angry sizzle of steak as I calmly, slowly, flipped it one honest sound in an afternoon full of lies. The sound of the truth about to speak. I didn't look at her. I set the steak back on the grate, aligned it just so. Then I set the tongs on the side table, not a slam, but a slow, deliberate placement. Metal on wood ran bright in the hush. I wiped my hands on my old grease-stained apron, a gesture I've made 1,000 times. At last I turned. I didn't look at Tiffany. I looked straight at my son, but I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, even Mrs. Gable over the fence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roar. I used the voice I used to quote the price of a replacement part of voice with no room for bargaining or feeling. Clear, factual, unyielding. Then maybe her big vision can cover the next $5,000 payment on the marketing company loan. I paused on purpose, let the words hang in the heavy heat. The loan I've been paying for the last 6 months. Silence settled over the yard, hotter than the coals. Tiffany's smile shattered like glass. Her eyes went wide with stunned disbelief. Leo looked gut-punched, breath gone. Dave took a quick step back, as if dodging an oncoming blast. And over the fence, Mrs. Gable had stopped weeding. She stood with hands on hips, staring hard. The play had officially begun, and the curtain had just gone up for the whole neighborhood. Dave Henderson was the first to break the silence. He muttered something about needing to check his grill, patted my shoulder awkwardly, and beat a hasty retreat. Across the fence, Mrs. Gable just shook her head slowly and went inside. The public performance was over. Time for the backstage confrontation. Leo grabbed Tiffany's arm, his face still chalk white with shock, and pulled her into the house. "We need to talk," he hissed. The screen door snapped shut behind them. I calmly moved the finished steaks onto a platter, tented them with foil, and followed. The storm had only just begun. I stepped into the living room right as the fight burst open. Their shouting had no weight to it. It was just noise, like a gearbox that slipped the tooth metal, screaming without meaning. "This is your fault!" Tiffany shrieked, jabbing a finger in Leo's face. The polished veneer was gone, leaving raw rage. "You promised everything was under control. You promised your father would never." "How am I supposed to keep control when you keep demanding things we can't afford?" Leo shouted back for the first time, standing up to her. Desperation had lent him a shred of courage. "That house, that vacation, that damn yacht club. That's our image, Leo," Tiffany screamed. "Don't you get it? Without it, we're nothing." And then, in her fury, she tore off the last of her mask. "I turned down a proposal from a bank executive to be with you. A real man. You owe me this, Leo." The confession hung in the air, cold, merciless. A business contract read aloud. I watched my son step back as if slapped. Even in his blindness, he could see the naked truth in those words. I let their storm blow itself out. A child's anger is loud and brief. An old man's anger is different. It's quiet, patient, and it knows exactly where to strike. When they were down to rag breaths and hateful glares, I spoke. "You two finished?" I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and went to my little study, the room Mary used to sew in. On the shelf, between dog-eared repair manuals, sat a small dark wooden box. I picked it up. Its weight was familiar. Back in the living room, I set the box on the coffee table between them. The sound it made was solid, final. I looked straight at Leo. "You talk about big vision. My vision's simple, son. Work hard, live honest, take care of your family." Then I turned to Tiffany. Defiance flickered in her eyes, but fear lived underneath it. "You talk about turning down a bank executive, about the real man." I paused. "I wonder if you know that the loan I've been paying for Leo wasn't to build a company. They thought this fight was about money. They were wrong. Money was a symptom. The disease ran deeper. It wasn't a startup loan," I said, voice flat, emotionless. Each sentence a hammer blow. It was to cover a poker loss in Vegas. I saw Leo flinch. Every drop of blood drained from his face. A trip, he told me, was a business conference. And, unless I'm mistaken, he told you he was visiting a sick aunt in Arizona. Tiffany's eyes snapped from me to Leo. Horror and disgust mingled there. Then I delivered the last blow, the one that hurts where it counts. All of it, $30,000 over 6 months, was the money I set aside to fix this roof. The roof your mother, Mary, always wanted before she died. Silence flooded the room. Not the silence of shame, something heavier. The silence of destruction. Leo went still, paper white. Tiffany looked at him as if he were a stranger, a creature she'd never known. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply opened the wooden box. Inside were no documents, no proofs. Just an old photograph, corners worn from too much handling. Mary and me in front of this house 20 years ago, hand in hand, grinning beneath the tired old roof. I slid the photo across the table to Leo. "My legacy is honor," I said softly. "You chose to build something else. I voted." The silence that followed weighed more than any scream. It was the silence of a soul being judged. Tiffany didn't say a word. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the glittering diamond ring off her finger and set it on the table beside the photo. The sound it made was tiny, but it cracked like a gunshot. Then she stood, grabbed her purse, and walked out without looking back. Leo collapsed onto the couch, buried his face in his hands, and began to cry. Not tears of remorse, broken sobs from a man who has lost everything. I watched him for a moment, taking in the wreckage of the boy I'd raised. There was no satisfaction in me, only a deep sadness and a cold clarity. I turned, walked out of that house, and headed for my garage. I pulled the heavy wooden door shut behind me. In the familiar dark, in the smell of oil and metal, I finally exhaled. Not in anger, something steadier. Peace. The structure had entirely failed, and now the cleanup could begin. After Tiffany's door slammed and Leo's sobs faded into silence, my house went still. Not the stillness of peace, but the hush of a battlefield after the fight, air thick with cordite and loss. I stood in the living room for a long time, staring at the diamond ring abandoned on the coffee table, glittering lifelessly beside Mary's photograph. I went out to my garage, the one place where things still make sense. I sat on the old shop stool and looked at the tools on the wall, each one in its rightful place. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, like when we finally tear down the worn-out engine. The job is done, and what's left is a cold heap of parts. The adrenaline of confrontation had drained away, leaving a bone-deep weariness. Justice had been served, but it felt like replacing a critical component. Yes, the machine will run again, but you'll always know something inside it is no longer original. A metal scar that never fades. Dusk had fallen by the time I went back inside. I picked up Mary's picture, my calloused thumb brushing over her smile. We had so many plans for this house, for our old age. A new roof, a vegetable garden, aimless rides in the pickup, with no destination. I wonder what she would have thought of what I'd done today, proud that I defended our family's honor, or heartsick that I pushed our only son farther away. Maybe both. Loneliness, an old companion, felt heavier than usual that night. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Gable from next door, a dish in her hands under a towel. A warm apple pie. I made too much, she said, eyes avoiding mine. Thought you might like some. She didn't ask about the yelling. Didn't ask why Leo's BMW had shot off like a haunted thing, or why Tiffany had walked out of my house with fury on her face. The way she set the pie down without a single question said more than any cross-examination ever could. It said, I saw. The whole neighborhood heard. The story wasn't mine alone anymore. Thank you, Martha, I murmured. That's kind of you. She nodded and went home. All the next day, Monday, passed in a frightening quiet. My phone, that little tether to the world, lay on the kitchen table black and still as a headstone. No texts, no call from Leo. Maybe he stayed home, I thought. But when I drove by that afternoon, the BMW was gone. The silence weighed more than the shouting had. With every hour it didn't ring, the quiet grew louder. I realized I hadn't just shut off the money. I might have cut the last line to my son. That evening, I couldn't sit through the TV's chatter. I went down to the basement, where the air is cool and smells like time. In the corner, under a heavy tarp, was a shape I'd chosen to forget. I pulled the cover back, dust lifted into the dim light, the frame of a 1931 Ford Model A. The project Mary and I had planned for my retirement. We bought it from an old farm out past town, and we dreamed of the days we'd spend bringing it back to life. Then she got sick, and the car, like our dreams, was left behind. I didn't uncover it with any plan in mind. I just needed to touch something real. The thick dust on the old Ford's bones felt like the dust of all the years we'd set aside. When my hand met the cold steel, I didn't think about the past I'd lost. I thought about a project, something broken I could actually fix. I went upstairs for a clean rag and a bottle of oil. Back in the basement, I started on the first fender, slow and methodical. As I wiped away the years of grime, it felt like I wasn't just cleaning a car. I was clearing a corner of my own soul. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening? Leo's world had shrunk to the size of a BMW. The car that once signaled success was now his prison. The rich Napa leather he'd bragged about carried a new smell of desperation, mingled with the grease of cheap drive-through burgers wolfed down in the dark. The steering wheel wasn't a way to control his life anymore. It was a place to rest his forehead each night, trying to push away his father's disappointed face and Tiffany's last look of disgust. For the first 3 days, he tried. He called the partners, the friends he'd toasted with champagne. Every call rolled to voicemail. The network he so carefully curated turned out to be a spiderweb thin, fragile, and now torn to shreds. He learned a brutal truth. He never belonged to that world. He'd been a tolerated guest, and his ticket had expired. By day 4, the fuel needle lay flat against the red. The warning light had blinked all day. He drove to a pawn shop in a tired part of town, where the window bars looked sturdier than his future. He slipped the Rolex off his wrist. It felt strangely light. The pawnbroker had weary eyes and a nicotine-stained mustache. He glanced at the watch, then at Leo. There was no pity in his look, just a cheap kind of understanding. He knew exactly what Leo was. A man who'd flown too high and fallen hard, a story as old as the city. 200, he said, not bothering to look up. It's worth 15 grand, Leo stammered, sounding pathetic even to himself. The man shrugged. Then sell it to someone with 15 grand. I've got 200. It's gotta to work. When the crumpled bill slid across the counter, Leo felt like he was selling off the last shard of his soul. He took the money and felt filthy. $200 enough to fill the tank and buy a few more days in his rolling cell. The humiliation hit like a slap. It shocked him awake from the fever dream of self-pity. That night, he spotted a sign outside the industrial park. Warehouse help overnight. Without thinking, he pulled in. The manager, a big man with a beer gut and a permanent scowl, looked him up and down. Never done real work, have you, city boy? He asked. No, Leo admitted. Job's lousy, pays lousier, starts at 10. That night, Leo learned what work felt like. He humped heavy boxes from the trucks to the floor. Sweat streamed down his face, sting in his eyes. His back throbbed, his palms burned. It was real, more real than any contract he'd ever bragged about. For the first time in his life, he was honestly exhausted. Nights piled up like that. He labored in silence, mind blank. During the day, he dozed in the reclined leather seat of the BMW, parked at the Walmart lot. He didn't think about Tiffany or parties anymore. He thought about the next shift, the ache in his muscles, and sometimes about his mother's photograph, the one his father slid across the table. The moment broke over him on a Tuesday night during a 10-minute break. He sat on a concrete step chewing a dry sandwich. Across the lot, under jaundiced lights, one of the truck drivers was showing his little boy how to fix a bicycle, patiently oiling the chain, tightening a loose bolt. The boy watched, intent, small hands trying to copy his father. Something in Leo cracked. His head dipped, and hot tears fell onto the sandwich. He cried without sound, his body shaking. He cried for the kid's innocence, for the father's patience, and for everything he'd thrown away. His own father had tried to teach him 1,000 times Saturday afternoons in the garage. The smell of grease, the heft of a wrench. But Leo hadn't wanted to learn how to fix things. He only wanted to drive what others had already repaired. He saw himself clear. Not an entrepreneur, not a self-made man, just an overgrown kid always hunting a shortcut, an addict of rescue, hooked on the easy high of admiration. And the man who'd always rescued him, who kept quietly filling the tank of his counterfeit life, was the very man he'd betrayed most. That week, when the first wages came wrinkled hundreds and a few smaller bills, Leo didn't rent a cheap room. He didn't buy a decent meal. He drove to an old neighborhood where auto parts stores still smelled like metal and stale oil, places he'd gone with his father as a boy. He walked into a dusty shop, the scent hitting him like a memory. After some hunting, he found it. An old carburetor, furred with dust, for a vintage Ford. He didn't know if it was right for the Model A his father owned. He didn't even know if his father had started on the car yet. It was a hunch. He spent most of his wages on it. As the clerk wrapped it in a beat-up cardboard box, Leo felt the faintest thread of hope for the first time in weeks. This wasn't a gift to beg forgiveness. It was an act, the first thing he'd done that wasn't for himself. And that was the frightening part. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the barbecue. I spent most of my time in the garage working on the Model A. The work kept my head busy. Metal sounds, the smell of grease, familiar, honest things. That afternoon, as I wrestled with a rust-frozen bolt, a shadow fell across the floor. I looked up. Leo stood in the doorway, where the harsh afternoon light met the cool shop shade. He didn't look like my son. He looked like a ghost of him thinner, worn down, bruised half-moons under his eyes. The borrowed swagger was gone. What was left was just my boy. He didn't dare step fully into the light. He was holding a beat-up cardboard box. After a long silence, he came in and set it on an empty workbench. "I'm not sure it's the right one," he said, voice rough. "Found it at an old parts store." I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped over. Inside was a Stromberg 97 carburetor, dusty but intact. The right kind for the flathead V8 I'd been planning to drop in the car. I didn't say a word. I looked at the carburetor, then up at Leo. And that's when I saw them, his hands. New, clumsy calluses forming on his soft palms, a few small cuts, a broken nail. They told a story no speech could touch. They spoke of regret. They spoke of a beginning. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say I forgave him. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out like spare change. It has to be earned. I jerked my chin toward an old Chevy block lying in the corner, something I'd meant to haul to the dump. "If you want to stay," I said, my voice even, "make yourself useful. Tear that motor down. See if there's anything worth saving." Ivory BN? It wasn't an order. It was a question. Was he ready to get his hands dirty? Ready to face what was broken? Leo looked at me for a long moment, then simply nodded. No excuses, no whining. He walked to the corner, picked up a wrench set, and went to work. We worked almost the whole afternoon in near silence. Only the music of metal, tools clinking, a stubborn bolt screaming loose, the steady breath of two men concentrating. Now and then I glanced over. He worked hard, methodically, if a little awkward. The focus was real. There was no performance here. About an hour in, I heard a soft "damn it." A wrench slipped, leaving a long, shallow gouge across the back of his hand. He looked at the cut, then at me, worry in his eyes. I said nothing. I stepped into the house, pulled the first aid kit from under the kitchen sink, and came back. I motioned for him to sit. I soaked the pad with antiseptic and cleaned the cut. When my calloused fingers touched his hand, I felt a tremor in him. Neither of us spoke. In that silence, a small, fragile bridge laid itself down between two ledges. We worked until the sun sank and stained the shop red. We were both bone-tired and smeared with grease. Leo had nearly stripped the old engine to the block. I set my tools down. "All right, that's enough for today." I looked at him, the son who'd hurt me more than anyone, and still my son. "There's your old room in the house. It's dusty. Clean it up and stay." That was all I said. It wasn't an invitation. It was an acknowledgement that he'd earned his way back. Not as a guest, but as a man learning how to fix things. I turned to my bench and started putting tools back in their places. I heard him stand there for a long beat. Then, from behind me, a quiet voice. "Thank you, Dad." Winter came and went. The garage became our refuge. Every bolt we tightened on the Model A seemed to cinch down some loose joint between father and son. We didn't talk much about the past. The past was a blown engine. You don't rebuild it. You salvage what parts still work and move on. 2 weeks after he came back, Leo found a job. Not a glossy office gig, but an apprenticeship at Sal's shop across town. Sal's an old friend of mine. Every morning he got up early, pulled on blue work clothes, and drove my beat-up pickup to work, the BMW long since towed away by the bank. Every Friday night, after payday, he'd come home, scrub the grease off, and lay a neat stack of bills on the kitchen table. "For the debt," he'd say, without meeting my eyes. At first, it was $50. Slowly, the number grew. I never recounted it. I just put it in an old coffee tin. This wasn't about money. It was about honor. Our lives settled into a new rhythm, steady, honest. Evenings in the garage, old blues drifting from the radio, the clink of metal on metal. He didn't talk about vision or empires anymore. He talked tire pressure and ignition timing. He asked how to balance a carb, which oil a V8 likes best. He stopped trying to be someone else and started learning how to be himself. One afternoon, hunting online for a rare part, I stumbled on a society page photo in the local paper. Tiffany, beaming, stood beside a much older man with silver hair and an expensive suit. The headline read, "Socialite Tiffany Hayes engaged to bank director Robert Wellington." The picture was perfect, like a luxury car ad. I looked at it a moment, then turned the page without a ripple. Some engines just aren't built to last. Her road no longer ran alongside mine. A few weeks later, I swung by Sal's with a few things. Leo was under a car, elbows deep. Sal clapped me on the shoulder. "Kid's a good hand, Frank," he rasped. "Doesn't mind the dirt, wants to learn, not like most these days. You raised him right." I only nodded, but on the drive home, a quiet, warming pride spread through my chest. A feeling I hadn't had in a very, very long time. At last, the day came. A Saturday morning in early spring. After nearly 6 months of work, everything was ready. Black paint deep as a lake, fresh leather inside, and the V8 we'd rebuilt together, snug under the hood. Leo slid behind the wheel. I stood by, a little keyed up. "All right," I said. "Let's see." He took a breath and turned the key. The engine coughed and went dead. "Give it a little more gas," I said, keeping my voice even. He tried again. This time, after a few squeals, the engine barked to life, then settled into a strong, steady thrum. That sound wasn't just a machine. It was a stop heart starting up again. It was the sound of forgiveness. The sound of two men building something back from wreckage. Leo looked up at me and, for the first time in years, smiled, clean and true, lighting his grease-streaked face. I smiled back. That afternoon, I handed him the keys. "You drive," I said. We weren't headed anywhere in particular. We took the winding country roads as the sun went down, painting the sky orange and purple. Windows down, a cool breeze carried the smell of damp earth and wildflowers. We didn't say much, just the soft V8 and the whisper of tires on blacktop. But in that easy quiet, I knew we weren't just driving a car. We were driving out of the past together. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? It was one of those late summer days when the heat finally loosens its grip air clean, sunlight the color of honey. Leo and I were at the county's annual classic car show. Our 1931 Model A, black and glossy as obsidian, sat on the grass, proud among the other old-timers. It had just won a blue ribbon for Best Restoration Project. A small award, maybe, but to us, it might as well have been Pebble Beach. I hung back a little, leaning against an old oak, and watched. Leo, his hands still faintly stained with grease, no matter how hard he scrubbed, was animated, explaining the Stromberg carb to a circle of gray-haired men. His eyes lit up as he talked about hunting down parts, about the challenge of nestling a V8 into a chassis nearly a century old. He sounded confident, not the borrowed swagger of a pitch deck, but the solid confidence of a man who knows what he's talking about. And as I looked at my son, the man he'd become, I understood something. I used to think my legacy was this garage, the house I sweated to pay off, tangible, sturdy things I could touch. I was wrong. My real legacy was standing right there. My legacy is the integrity in my son's eyes, the calluses on his hands, proof of honest work, the way he listens more than he talks, the humility learned the hard way from failure. My legacy isn't metal or mortar. It's a man who knows the worth of his hands, who can tell the difference between shine and substance. I thought back to the day he came home to the shop, broken and desperate. People say a father should give his kid everything, be the safety net. I learned a harder lesson. When your child finally comes back, wrecked and asking, you don't recite their sins. You don't hand them a lecture. You hand them a rag and show them how to wipe away the oil. You give them a job. You teach them how to rebuild not just a machine, but their own pride. That's a father's love. A father's love isn't a blank check. It's a toolbox. You hand them the tools, you show them how they work, And the hardest of all, you step back and trust they'll build something that matters. Maybe you, listening to this, are building something for your kids too. A business to pass down, a college fund. Those are good things. But pause and ask yourself, are you teaching them how to read a moral blueprint? Are you showing them the difference between a quality bolt and a cheap counterfeit that only looks the part? Because when life tests them, when the storms roll in, no check can buy them a foundation. No trust can replace the compass inside. The greatest act of love I ever gave my son wasn't paying his debts, buying him a house, or gifting him a fancy bottle of whiskey. The greatest act of love was letting him fail, letting him fall apart. Because only at the bottom, stripped of all that glitter, could he find the strength to rebuild not a fake empire, but a real man. Leo wrapped up his conversation and walked over with 2 cold sodas. He handed me one. "Want to take a lap?" he asked, tilting his head toward the car. I nodded, a smile spreading. "You drive." We climbed in new leather and the faint perfume of gas. When the engine caught with that crisp, muscular bark, I looked over at my son. He sat straight, hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the road ahead, and I knew my legacy was safe. It wasn't something I'd leave behind. It was sitting right here beside me, ready for his own road. And that legacy is priceless.